Guys, Swordsman, one of One Piece's most important discussions. People have been wondering what constitutes being the world's greatest for years. As of right now, Dracula Mihawk has the title, and obviously it's Roronoa Zoro's goal. But in recent times, a lot of other really strong swordsmen have come into play and made us question what it all really means. People like Fujitora, Ethan Baron v. Nesjiro, the whole Figureland family. But I believe that there's one underrated legend who stands above all of them. Someone who in his prime probably even stood higher than where Mihawk is standing right now. And of course I'm talking about Silver's Rayleigh, the world's last strongest swordsman. Cause this theory posits that Rayleigh was the previous world's strongest swordsman and that Mihawk actually beat him for the title. And there's a decent amount of evidence, so y'all, lock in. But before we get too deep in the weeds of fictional swordplay, y'all, I need y'all to do something for me. Like the video, okay? This is very important. Subscribe to the channel for more One Piece content just like this every week, without fail. I main One Piece, but I do other anime content as well. And share it around with all your friends who love the series. You know what we always say here. Let's get it going. Oh, make sure you subscribe to me and my boys over at CSY. We really doing our big one. Now, when thinking about Rayleigh being the world's strongest swordsman, a couple of things start to fall into place. Firstly is how Mihawk and Rayleigh even relate to each other, and it's all through one person, Shanks. We know, of course, that Shanks knows Rayleigh because, they were on the same crew back in the day. And we also know that Shanks and Mihawk, while being dueling rivals when it comes to swordplay, in general, they were at least amicable with each other, if not just straight up friends. I feel like Mihawk would share his dream of wanting to become the world's strongest swordsman with Shanks. And it makes sense for Shanks hearing that to be like, oh, I know the current world's strongest swordsman. And maybe even he be the one to facilitate the challenge between Mihawk and Rayleigh. And then I think that Rayleigh, who would, mind you, still be incredibly strong at this point, ends up losing to a rising star in Mihawk. Likely an extreme diff fight. And after that event, Mihawk would officially be known as the world's strongest swordsman. Now tell me, does that not sound plausible? It also makes sense timeline-wise. We already know that Mihawk stopped fighting Shanks once Shanks lost his left arm. But when exactly did this happen? It kind of leaves a gap in Mihawk's timeline. After Shanks lost his arm, Mihawk couldn't prove anything by beating him anymore. So what does he do instead? He went and found the guy that Shanks learned from and beat him. Now, the wiki seems to suggest that Mihawk gained the title of the world's strongest swordsman prior to the start of the Great Pirate Era, as he apparently had it at the age of 19 at Gold Roger's execution. However, I don't necessarily think that's true. Mind you, we're never given an exact year of when he became the world's strongest swordsman or when people started referring to him as that. We simply know that by the time we meet him, it's clearly in his past. So I don't think that it's out of the realm of possibility that after fighting Shanks and being rivals with him, he learns about Rayleigh and Shanks' connection through Shanks and goes to fight Rayleigh shortly after. Now, it may not have been after Shanks lost his arm 12 years ago because you might say that, well, that's late even for him. So by that point, Mihawk would already be the world's strongest swordsman, but is still just seeking out Shanks regardless. Putting that aside for a bit, I also think that this is possible because Rayleigh is very consistent with what we know to be true of the world's strongest swordsman. And by this, I primarily mean having Conqueror's Haki. I mean, think about it. We know that Conqueror's Haki indicates some sort of domination in a field, right? I mean, if you look at the wiki, it'll literally tell you how everybody who has Conqueror's Haki is dominating or leading or is a conqueror in some way. For everyone with Conquerors, we can identify a drive, ambition, or just reason for them to actually have that ability. So then you start to think, well, what's Rayleigh's? He is subordinate to Roger, another conqueror, but what's his own personal drive? I think it could make a lot of sense for him to, at least at some point, have been striving for the title. And maybe he wasn't even purposefully striving to become the world's strongest swordsman, but he just, became so ridiculously strong that people just started referring to him as that. This would also make sense with why his status is so legendary. Yes, everybody knows he is the right hand of the Pirate King, but the way he's talked about is like on top of that, he is a legend in his own right. And this tracks because it would be the same way how we got on Elbaf and Mescopper Gaban. People talk about him not only as Roger's left hand, but as a legend himself. So then you start to think, well, what reasons could Rayleigh be a legend in his own right? What stories are there about him? And I think making him the world's previous strongest swordsman, I think that slots in with the legendary status perfectly. And more broadly, there's also the idea that, as I mentioned in my Monster Trios vid, which you should definitely check out after this one, that one it's pretty great. Zoro and Rayleigh are intentionally meant to be parallels. Since being the world's strongest swordsman is Zoro's goal, and Zoro and Rayleigh are parallels, it obviously makes sense to think that, well, Rayleigh may have been striving for that title at some point in his past. or at least symbolically for there to be more of a tie between the two of them. Think back to when Rayleigh was training Luffy in Haki. Rayleigh relies entirely on his own mastery of Haki and swordsmanship, and alongside that, just pure finesse and physicality, almost like Zoro would. He doesn't just know how to swing a sword. Rayleigh embodies what Zoro is trying to become. A warrior who doesn't rely on tricks or powers, just absolute terrifying will. You thought the evidence was done? Huh, nope, I got more. Because furthermore, we can look at his title of the Dark King. That seems to imply to me at least that he has some sort of mastery over Haki. Since obviously armament Haki, the vulcanization is what allows you to turn your limbs or weapons black. So with that, I think it makes sense that he was such a proficient master of both swordsmanship and Haki that combining those two, people just started calling him the Dark King. And he gained massive amount of respect from across all pirating generations. Remember, when we met Rayleigh at Sabaody, everybody on the crew, besides Luffy obviously, knew who he was. Oh, and before I continue, there's no qualms about Rayleigh's strength, right? Like nobody's gonna question if Rayleigh was potentially strong enough. Cause just in case you do, we got multiple instances of Rayleigh's pedigree, clashing evenly with Admiral Kizaru and even holding him off with just basic sword and Haki. He was one of the prominent fighters both in the Roger Pirates vs. Whitebeard Pirates battle that we saw in Odin's flashback, as well as during the events of God Valley. Blackbeard, who most people, incredulously, have in their top 3 right now, was pissing his pants at the idea, at the very notion, the thought of having to fight Silver's Rayleigh. Mind you, a decrepit, out of his prime Rayleigh. His presence alone was enough to make an Emperor of the Sea run away with his tail tucked between his hilariously skinny legs. Is it true that Rayleigh said that, well, I don't think I could beat him in his full strength either? Well, yes, but who's that really more of a boon for? Because lest I remind you, he is pushing 80 and out of his prime. Now there is something to be said that the world's strongest swordsman as a title itself is in fact contentious. Because now that the God's Knights have been introduced, who knows if that's true necessarily. In case you don't get it, there's a common thought nowadays that ever since the God's Knights have been introduced, you know, the Figurlin family and all of them, there's a whole motif of the gods of the world being like upper or separated from the mortal plane. And so when people refer to the world's strongest swordsman, they're not including people in the God's Knights because the gods don't view themselves as part of that world. And mind you, because of that separation, most people probably don't even have context on who the God's Knights even are, much less if they're strong or not, and even much less if that strength comes from swordsmanship. And you might want to say, well, the God Valley incident, that clearly showed something, but that was 38 years ago. I don't know that it was just a publicized event like that. Actually, in fact, I just remembered. The entire event was literally censored by the government, almost like they literally don't want people to know just how strong the government forces are. Even we are only now getting a grasp of understanding. So all that is to say that the world's strongest swordsman as a title, take it or leave it. Now a common rebuttal people might say to this theory is, well then why don't we see Zoro and Rayleigh interacting more? I mean, Zoro as somebody who's aspiring to that title, meaning somebody who used to have it. But the thing is, do they really need to? Like, if you really think about it, Zoro was already getting multiple interactions with Mihawk, the world's current strongest swordsman. I just don't see what meeting Rayleigh or like learning things from Rayleigh would do for him that literally meeting from the guy he's trying to beat wouldn't. Another plot hole people may be asking then is why Zoro and the rest of the crew, by consequence, don't actually know that Rayleigh was this world's strongest swordsman before. Isn't that something that Rayleigh would mention to Luffy and that Luffy, knowing Zoro's dream, would mention to Zoro? Well, there's a few things with that. One, if Rayleigh did tell Luffy this during the time skip, it's Luffy. I don't think he's remembering it. I know that we don't like to really call him that for real, but y'all, Luffy's stupid and an airhead. Things that don't directly affect him literally just like float by the wayside. But even if he did remember it, what exactly does Zoro gain from learning this information? I mean, they had already left Rayleigh behind at Sabaody when they were continuing on their journey. It's not like they're gonna turn around and go back to start asking questions about being the world's strongest swordsman. And as I mentioned, he already trained under Mihawk. It's not like him asking Rayleigh to train him is gonna do anything for him. And even if you think about his personality, I don't think Zoro would want to ask Rayleigh anything. I feel like he would see it as some form of cheating almost, like some sort of way to try and gain tricks or gain an advantage over beating Mihawk. I don't think he'd go for that because it's Zoro. He values the honor in swordsmanship, so he's gonna want to gain that strength and power on his own, be able to defeat Mihawk of his own merit. Same way that, as I think, Mihawk defeated Rayleigh of his own merit. I want to know what you guys think of this theory. Do you think that Rayleigh could have been the world's previous strongest swordsman? Do you think Mihawk had to beat him for the title, or Mihawk was just the progenitor himself? Let me know all that good stuff and more in the comments below. Well, that is the end of the video, y'all, but before we go, like it, subscribe, share it around with all your friends who love the series, anime and manga in general. As I always say, trying to build a community here, but I need your help to do it. That's gonna be all for me. I'll catch you on the next one, and always remember, one piece, one life. Update on the room real quick. I was able to get one poster up at least. My bulletin board is having staying up issues, but I promise you very soon this side is going to be looking pretty lively.